The shell of Turtle Beach is primarily known for gaming headsets, from entry to high-end flagships. In July of 2021, I had the pleasure of testing their first controller prior to public release so I could give my feedback to my audience and also TB. They followed up with another budget-wired Xbox pad about a year later with the Reactor. Then a couple years later, they released their high-end wireless flagship, the Stealth, and an interesting variant called the Pivot. But with a huge influx of new racing fans, which also bleeds over into sim racing, Turtle Beach saw a grand opportunity to expand past their flight simulator equipment, which holds the Velocity name, and get into racing sim equipment. That's a bold move, Cotton, and we will see if it pays off for them, or if they get plastered with big rubber balls in the form of all of its competitors, literally every other competitor on the market. A quick disclaimer for my audience, the Stallions and Stallionettes. This product was sent for review by Turtle Beach, but this is going to be an honest, comprehensive review. They don't get an early preview, and the thoughts in this video are 100% my own, so if there's any cons, shortcomings, or areas of improvement, you're going to hear about it, so these companies make better products over time. But I do want to say thank you to Turtle Beach for sending out their first sim racing bundle. The only way to purchase it is as a bundle. You cannot piecemeal Wheelbase or anything like that, because they don't have an ecosystem yet, as this is their first bundle, so unlike Fanatec or Moza, where you can pick up a base and then get a wheel later and then a different wheel, and then you upgrade your pedals because they're modular. You only need 2 to start, but then you add a clutch later when you get that raise, and then you sold an ounce so you're able to afford a shifter and, you know, whatever. So a quick summary or overview of what we're reviewing today. What is this thing? It is a $650 ready-to-run bundle. You ain't gonna be running, you're gonna be sitting racing on Xbox or PC. I was unable to force compatibility on the PS5 even with adapters. I want to quickly touch on a couple of key points. The first one being compatibility with the Xbox, which was absolutely seamless, flawless. So that is fantastic, although there are other wheels on the market from Fanatec and Logitech that do have Xbox compatibility without the use of converters or adapters. The next point is pricing. If you're completely green to sim racing equipment, you might be scratching your head, tuchus, other parts that I don't need to know about, wondering, is that a lot of money? Is that a little bit of money? Like $650, that's a PlayStation 5 and then some. Nowhere else in gaming, and yes, I am going to call sim racing gaming for just a second. Digital entertainment, it falls under that umbrella. I don't know why I did that with my voice. Nowhere in the video game peripheral industry is there such a wide price spread where you can get an entry-level bundle that has everything you need to clamp onto your desk. We're talking a shifter, a wheel, and pedals to go on the ground for like $40, $50 on Amazon. But on the other end of the spectrum, a single active pedal can cost you over $2,000. And keep in mind, you need to be bolting that into a solid chassis, something like a profile rig. There's also individual wheels that are over $2,000, and keep in mind that needs a wheel base to snap into. Having said that, this wheel is definitely focused on, I will say, the console demographic, everything from its styling, its cosmetics. I'm not going to dive ahead to cosmetics because there is an entire section about it later, but styling aside, combining pricing, styling, the existing Xbox compatibility, and the user experience, which I experienced over the last 3 weeks, it is a direct drive wheelbase, which is good. It's not a belt or cog style wheel like a lot of the entry-level joints of yesteryear. It is silent in operation. That's good. It didn't get warm well, you won't really know because there's that big plastic housing over it, but it didn't seem to get warm, and it produces a maximum torque of 7.2 Newton meters, which in my experience was plenty. I didn't have any issues where that was the problem, but there are issues with the force feedback, which we will cover later. And I will say Turtle Beach has succeeded in appearing like a tremendous value on paper. Let's come back to reality though and find out if it's a genuinely good user experience or not. So the bundle does come with a wheel base, a wheel that attaches to it, which is a D shape. We'll talk about that later. There's an entire section for just the wheel, and it is the only wheel that exists in the ecosystem. We'll call it that if they are going to expand on that later. And it is a quick release, so technically they could add different shapes, a traditional circular wheel for drift and rally, formula style wheel, and maybe a slightly bigger GT wheel. Preaching to the choir here. It does come with pedals with a 100-kilogram load cell brake. All this sounds good on paper. A button box, which no other ready-to-run bundle that I can think of comes with a button box. So that looks so cool on paper, I'm telling you. The shifter is a separate $130 purchase, kind enough to send out as well. It all came in one box, which was cool. I hooked it right up and got to ripping with it. The shifter, which is sold out here, Amazon, every third-party vendor that I've looked at, is actually pretty damn good. It is a 7 forward gear, 1 reverse H gate, and it can also be changed into a sequential shifter if you want to feel like can block for a second, and it's got a handbrake mode if you don't have a separate e-brake or ripstick on your rig. Comes with 2 shift knobs, it's got RGB lighting to match the rest of the VelocityOne system, and it's got a high and low switch if you're doing trucking sims, so you can row through a hell of a lot of gears. A final note before we get into the actual meat and potatoes of the review, looking at each component hardware-wise, and then a deep dive of the software, a tour of the app if you shall. If anyone's going to purchase this wheel, if you are interested in the bundle here, I just strongly advise not spending more than $400 US on it, which is the current asking price on Amazon and has been for about a month now. So this might just be the going rate on Amazon. They're still asking $650 on the TB website. There's 2 parts or components attached to this base that simply should not have been part of the bundle and would have made more sense for Turtle Beach and a better value at the end of the day for consumers picking this sucker up. That grease-covered RMD screen, let's talk about that. The screen itself is a great concept because it allows you to do all of the customization inside the application, which is available on Xbox and PC on the base itself, that's wonderful. However, the processor on board is a lackluster piece of crap. It makes it very laggy and slow to navigate, especially when you're in the middle of a race and you're trying to quickly adjust a setting. Yes, you can bind that to these 3 knobs here, which cannot be bound to anything in gameplay, so you can adjust your wheelbase's force feedback. But if you're trying to do a more in-depth setting, for example, the dead zone of your clutch or something, you can do that on this screen, but it's very slow to navigate. There were several times where I'm sitting there spamming a button. I'm thinking, is the screen broken, frozen? And then 15 seconds later, it remembers where she is. Also, from a cosmetic standpoint, the RGB is fantastic, but the RMD screen, the display, is always yellow. The lighting on the screen should fade with the spectrum cycling of the rest of the RGB lights on the accessories. That would have really completed the look. The most important part of the equation, the wheelbase. How did it perform driving? Well, I have no quarrels with the peak strength of 7 Newton meters. In fact, I actually tapered it down a lot of the time to that 75% mark. So the peak strength was not my issue. The force feedback itself was so numb and disconnected, and there's not a lot of settings or tweakage. There's a few sliders, but it didn't do a whole heck of a lot. It did help, but it did not get the wheel where I wanted it to. And that's unfortunate because this review, mine that you're patiently sitting through, diddling yourself through right now, is the latest, most current, up-to-date review on this wheelbase. And all the previous reviewers were saying things 6 months ago, a year ago. I hope the software can make the driving experience feel a little bit less numb and more connected. Gentlemen, ladies, it has not. Really unfortunate. The biggest problem is when you're braking neutral, it has this, the best way to describe it is it just feels like some kind of a spring-loaded rubber band. It doesn't feel like a real steering rack. Go in your car right now and just try and turn it, and then grab your Turtle Beach velocity wheel. It doesn't feel similar at all, and generally a direct drive wheelbase, even the entry-level joints in that $400 mark, can somewhat reproduce braking neutral like a real steering rack. This, not so much. A catastrophic issue I ran into with the wheelbase, it was bricked for an entire day, setting me back on my review and my racing. I had races to do, and I couldn't do them because the fucking wheel that was bolted to my riglet was not working. It was so frustrating.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating.
I was one step away from emailing my representative at TB that sent the sucker out, asking if he knew what to do, but he probably would be like, oh, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, dude. I just sent you the product for review. How's it coming? Apparently, I'm not the only one that survived this stupid issue. There is an article that is going to be linked in the description below, but I'm just gonna tell you what to do right about
right now.
Somehow, if you're...
Jesus!
this!
Somehow, during an update process, if your wheelbase were to come disconnected, because the update takes 20 minutes, it quotes 20 minutes, and it's going to take every second of that. If your wheelbase were to come disconnected, because say for example, your PC has a sleep setting, turns it off or something like that, or you accidentally trip on the power cord and this thing powers off during the update process, just simple scenarios, situations that could happen. It disconnects the wheelbase, unpairs it. You're just gonna get these flashing lights and you're gonna think that you're never gonna race again, that you should just retire early. That's not the case. You need to attach the wheelbase and hold down these two buttons. I've already forgotten the process. It's been like a week or so. I am going to link the article down there in the description below because it is a common issue and I experienced it. It was bricked for a day. The wheel itself, as y'all know, from my controller reviews, I'm a bit of a button specialist. I've mollywopped a lot of McClickies in my day, and having said that, this trio here is very cramped and close together, so if you're wearing some racing gauntlets, some gloves, you might press a button that you ought not have meant to. Also, the lettering is very cheaply printed on, which is made apparent when the RGB bleeds through it. I'll touch on the RGB later. It's one of my favorite features of this bundle, but it kind of looks like a bundle of poop on the buttons. That's just because of the font or lettering. As for the cosmetics of the wheel, there are three aspects that I personally don't like. First one being this hyper gloss Turtle Beach logo dead center. If you are an owner of this wheel, you could put a matte black vinyl wrap over it or something. But as you can see, this has already collected fingerprints, a couple of micro scratches, and combines with the faux carbon fiber, which is just injection molded plastic. And then the yellow stitching, those three aspects do combine to form what looks to my goopy corneas to be a very cheap looking wheel. But what's more important than cosmetics, how does the sucker function? Actually pretty damn good. Now it is a D shape, which can give you a little bit of leg room so you're not smacking your knees when you're getting into your desk or rig, but it would have made more sense since there's only one included wheel and there's a chance that this is the only wheel Velocity Hub owners ever see, that it would have been a completely round wheel, as that is the most versatile. You can use it in the most disciplines of racing, drift, rally, karting, yes, even formula. Not as ideal as having a yoke or butterfly, but still, you can use a round wheel for pretty much everything, as where a D wheel is going to give you a hard time during drift or rally when you're trying to let the wheel slip through your fingers.
My fingers hurt.
One clever design aspect from Turtle Beach is the fact that these red buttons are a few millimeters deeper or further in than the A and B buttons right next to it, which makes quickly reaching over and being able to tell which button you're hitting that much easier. They are mechanical and clicky. Not too loud or obnoxious, but just too small and close together. These rotary encoders do top out and bottom out, and they are spring-loaded. They're not infinitely spinning, which I'm fine with. I don't really have a preference with that. What I do not like is the fact that this rotary dial is only for controlling the RMD screen, which I'm going to cover in its own section in this review. So this looks like you should be able to bind this in-game, but you cannot use the back, select, or rotation of the E2 dial. I have zero issues with the quick release system. I was able to quickly attach and detach it. You do have to manually hold back the plastic retaining ring. It doesn't stay in the locked position like a lot of other wheels, such as the Logitech Pro. This is a little bit more plasticky and toyish, but it's very simple to use. Line up these lines or notches with the comrades or matching buddies on the hub. Hold back the ring. As for the paddles, this was a pretty big letdown because you use these constantly for shifting. There's a little thin magnet in there, so I guess these are on paper. Remember, all this looks so good on paper. These are magnetic shifters, but I reassure you that they feel very similar to your buddy's G27 Logitech wheel. It sounds very hollow, clacky. But guess what? You're not gonna hear that because you've got headphones in or speakers blaring in your ear canals. What is a big damn letdown is with these linear levers, which can often be used for handbrake and clutch and rally. They don't have a very satisfying resistance, but they do have enough travel to modulate, and they were recognized in the software, so that's a plus.
So the brakes are load cell, which on paper sounds fantastic. However, there is a tremendous amount of flex in this plastic base, which unfortunately completely defeats the purpose or benefit of going with a load cell brake. To approach a corner corner, boom, I can instantly and consistently get to, we'll say 3/4 brake application, and then I can kind of modulate around that pressure point, as opposed to position-based throttles like the G27 or G923 from Logitech, which use the actual angle or position of the pedal, which isn't nearly as consistent as pressure or force. Now, this is 100 kilogram max input, but that's good. That's pretty standard for load cell brakes. However, like I said, there's a lot of flex in the plastic base, and the biggest problem with these pedals has to be if you're using it with the base as a hub, which you're going to do if you're using it on Xbox, or even people that pick this up for PC, the majority of the key demographic for this product are going to be most likely clamping this onto a desk and plugging the shifter and pedals and button box directly into the base to save those USB ports and for the simplicity of using the base as the brain or hub for all the accessories. However, there's a ton of input lag or delay introduced through that method, and this applies to the pedals, all three of them. The shifter, I was missing shifts like nobody's business, and I was wondering to myself, oh, did I forget how to drive stick or something? Oh, contraire mon frere, now that I'm using the shifter directly connected to the PC, we're a-okay banging through the gears. But that's a huge problem when it comes to brakes, where consistency is key, especially with the brake pedal. This is probably the most important in sim racing. And between that hardware limitation of a ton of physical flex on the base itself, and then the software problem of it having a ton of choppy, inconsistent inputs if you're using the base, even connecting this directly to PC, I unfortunately was unable to get down that pressure point. You can adjust the position of these pedals. They are aluminum, and they are machined very nicely, so if you're rocking these bad boys barefoot, you're not going to slice up your toesies or anything. And I do like the heel rest or base plate. Not only cosmetically do I think it looks kind of snazzy, but it also felt nice. Your best bet, honestly, might just be running these suckers on the carpet, on the floor, because luckily there's enough weight in the ass end, the base plate back here, to where when you're smacking away on that brake pedal, it's not gonna do a stoppy in endo. The brake, this is an absolute deal breaker. Right around that pressure point, whenever you get into the meat and potatoes of the load cell, where you hit some resistance like a real brake, it just jumps up right about there. Bam. That's around the braking point you want to hit consistently and modulate around, but it just locks up the brakes. We've got a new and fun issue with the Turtle Beach, the throttle, trying to modulate it very gently, jumps up to 50%. But I guess that's better than the issue that people used to have prior to the updates, where you would be basically spamming the throttle to try and get it to wake up and it's not even responding.
Corner to corner, it's a 5-inch screen. This RMD display should have been lopped off like a redneck convertible, where they just hacked the top off it with a rusty hacksaw. Because the Xbox app and PC app, which are identical to each other, the two platforms you're going to be using this on is either Xbox or PC, and simplified adjustments with these dials. Interestingly enough, with the Wheelbase, taking a look through this little peekaboo screen, you can see, lit up by RGB, the little K-Drive motor in there, also overlaying some B-roll from Will at Boosted Media, who did a teardown. And you can see the motor in there. I personally think this would have been a cooler looking Wheelbase if it was just that little K-Drive motor with maybe some RGB on the side of it or something. Probably would have been better for cooling too, because it could breathe instead of being covered with this plastic. This isn't ventilation, by the way, because this just goes to storage container with this tool, which also should not exist, because this is the desk clamp mechanism, which in comparison to something like the Logitech G lineup that are toolless and just let you screw it on and screw yourself off, this takes forever to sit there with this tool, jacking it down to your desk and then putting down the bat flaps. Moving on to this button box, the next savage disappointment that, much like the RMD screen, should have been just left out completely. Because a lot of sim racers, I'd say the majority of us, don't use a goddamn button box. And if you want a button box, you know exactly what model you want, and you're going to shop how many buttons and knobs you need, and you're certainly not going to want something that flexes and wiggles like this when you press it. You're going to want something that feels like you're pressing buttons on the dash of a real car, which this does not. Now, you can hard mount this to a profile rig or something, but there's deeper core issues that make that not even worth your time. With an update that rolled out a few months after launch, you can now bind this button in gameplay, which is cool because that was a big complaint in people's reviews, is that this turned on the Wheelbase. This always and still does turn off the Wheelbase, so don't accidentally press that in gameplay, because you'll probably have to close your game out if you're on PC and then relaunch it for it to recognize. So starting at the top row, you can now bind find these buttons, but the engine start button is very unresponsive. I have this bound to start my races in Assetto Corsa, and there were plenty of times I'd just sit here spamming this, sitting on the grid, waiting to start my race. The toggle switch ain't bad. Moving on. These dials here are infinitely spinning and have a decent resistance. You cannot push them in, which is kind of a bummer. And the biggest bummer here is these cannot be bound to any games. They're only for specific wheelbase functions in the software suite, which I'm going to tour you through in a little bit. So I had this bound to turn up my strength and my dampening settings for the wheelbase. Since we already covered the RMD screen's a laggy piece of poop. These buttons down here, the Bravo buttons, these were the only buttons that I personally had no real quarrels with and wouldn't take out back for a little scrap. These silly little numbers on the bottom are physically a three-way toggle switch, meaning you have bottom, middle, and up. But software-wise, they only activate a button upwards, and it's a button press. That is not how toggles are supposed to work. Technically, this could be something like windshield wipers, off in the center, low at the bottom, and then go up for high, or same thing with headlights, low and high beams. These don't function like typical toggle switches. This and this, gone.
Shut it down! Turn it off, you think!
So I'm unmounting the Turtle Beach Velocity because I've had my way with her up and down the apex of the corner, so to speak. I've put more than enough miles or kilometers than I personally wanted to, but I wanted to give this thing a fair shot. So I got the bat wings up right now because I had this secured with not only the desk clamp, but also 2 screws. So it was on there nice and firm like. But I wanted to point out how glossy this screen is. These are matte monitors right in front of me. You can see a difference in the surface, how shiny glossy this is, which is kind of cool if you want to check your makeup between races. The shifter, which was not part of the bundle. This is a separate $150 purchase, or $130. Popping up on screen is the correct numerical value. Also forgive all the tubing here. We are mid-build right now, so a little bit of cable management is being done. There's some things I really like about this shifter. On the whole, overall, I am a big fan of the shifter. I'm going to get the cons out of the way. What I do not like about it, the shortcomings, areas of improvement, because there are less of them. Do not pick this up if you are going to be connecting it directly to the wheelbase. I was missing shifts left and right. There is some kind of an input lag or delay where your inputs, your shifts are not quickly recognized by the wheelbase and then processed and sent to the PC or Xbox. If you're the best stick shift driver in the world, you're going to be grinding gears and missing shifts and blowing transmissions and smoking clutches and getting pissed off. Having said that, the next con is that the Turtle Beach app doesn't allow you control of the RGB lights. These coordinate with the wheelbase, but you can't do anything in the software as of now, so it's constantly static yellow. I'm going to put a little bit of black electrical tape over those because it doesn't sync up with the rest of the RGB in my setup. The next con is this shifter, which I do really like, but if you get passionate about your shifting and you happen to twist it counterclockwise, it's ready to twist itself off. Next con, it's not the most versatile for mounting. Things like Moza over here with their handbrake, but also their shifters have drilled out holes, so if you're mounting this to a profile rig or a cockpit, you should be better off to go. This does have an included plastic clamp if you're mounting it to a desk, and then 4 screw holes, but not the most versatile when it comes to mounting options. This shift knob feels great. It feels like a real leather-wrapped luxury vehicle. Very nice, very nice. Now, this is the sequential shifter, which you don't need to use when you go into sequential mode, but they do give you a physical option. Screw this sucker in. Also, there is an extension tube if you want a longer shaft. Me, I prefer working with the shorty that God gave me. On to the pros, because I really do like this shifter. For the price, I think it feels very notchy, very sincere, like you're shifting gears. Manual commuter car or something. This really does feel like that. And I do like the fact that you do have a 7th gear and then reverse. Reverse, obviously, you've got to have that, but to access it, you're going to push down, releases the lockout, and you can access it down and to the right, like a lot of real manual transmission cars like the Volkswagens. I've been wailing on this thing, really pounding through the gears, and this thing feels great now that it is connected directly to PC. It is also very versatile as it does work as an H-gate, and then with this button on the side, it does switch it over into a sequential where you can, boom, towards you for up a gear, away for down a gear. Yeah, that feels nice, and it also adds more resistance than the typical
H-gate. And there is also a handbrake mode. So in order to get into that, you are going to go into sequential and then turn on handbrake mode. And as you can see, this went from yellow to green. And now if I pull back, that's engaging a handbrake. It doesn't feel nearly as good as having a dedicated ripstick or something, but still cool. Then for even more versatility, there is high-low gears. So if you want access to even more than the 7 gears available, maybe you're doing a trucking sim or something, and you got a fat load to drop off, there you go, my friends. Overall, big fan of the shifter.
The application, the software suite, it's not very sweet, but what you're going to be using to control the hardware is called Turtle Beach One Velocity Tuner. It has a 1.8 stars from 16 dissatisfied customers, treated like an application as it is installed through the Microsoft Store. Now, you do need to be connected to power as well, so in case you think you're going to quickly plug in the USB port and make some quick tweaks in the software or something, it doesn't work like that. Go ahead and power the base on. Pretty cool startup animation. It's going to spin around. And now we are recognized as the VelocityOne. Now, this does not have the best Windows optimization. You cannot snap it to a corner. You cannot pinch and resize the edges. You cannot full screen. But one perk or benefit is the fact that the Xbox version is identical. So all these tweaks are available to you on the console. And in essence, they're also available on that RMD screen as well, although that is a pain to navigate when it's glitching out on you. First thing I recommend doing is coming down to this cog icon in the bottom left and checking your version. If an update is available, it'll immediately prompt you to do that, and keep your PC awake. Make sure the monitor doesn't even black out into sleep mode or anything, because it can and shall and will brick your Wheelbase. The first screen is an overview, which is indeed going to be a summary of all the rest of these tabs. Now, if you do have the pedals plugged in, which I currently do not, when you press them, it is going to show you in real time the linear application of them. And you are probably going to observe how choppy and stuttery they are. Seems to be a software issue, which luckily can be fixed. We saw that with the Moza wheelbases with the 3.0 update to their feedback, which made their wheelbases feel like new machines, quite simply. On the PC side of the house, you are only able to navigate this application with the mouse or keyboard. You'd like to just sit your ass down in your rig, your cockpit, and navigate with the joystick and the selection buttons on the wheel like a normal person. It does not allow you to do that, which is a tease because it even shows you up here, left bumper, right bumper to tab through the different tabs. It's a lie. It's a bold-faced lie. Switching the profiles is not the most fluid, smooth, and a lot of people don't know how to do it, so I'm going to show you. When you create a profile in the software suite, you're going to click on these 3 dibbly dots, and then you are going to come over to send to memory and select the slot that you want and flash it that away. And one really unfortunate thing is none of these changes that you're making take effect in real time. So things like the lighting, when you're changing the color or the brightness, and you look down and you're thinking, wow, this isn't doing anything. That's because you have to tab your silly butt over to profile, hit the 3 dots, send to memory, slot, whatever. Stupid. There's also a savage lack of customization with the wheelbase over here in the K-Drive section. I understand they're going for simplicity, as this is definitely for console gamers or new PC sim racing cadets, if you shall. I spent a lot of time dicking around with these sliders in game. I assigned them to the knobs, and while I was driving, I got one hand on the wheel, the other on my knob, twisting the top of it for pleasure, trying to figure out what is going to make this wheel feel a little bit less numb when I'm braking neutral, and just to
Today, Junior?
give me the feedback that you would expect a DD, a direct drive wheel, to provide you with. And these are the best that I've found. Damping means just that. It is dampening down or removing, kind of smoothing out a lot less of the finite inputs that you're feeling, such as running over the ripple strips or different textures in the road. Center spring, this is the biggest problem with this wheel, and that is braking neutral feels just like you're fighting a rubber band or something. Feels really weird, unnatural. Center spring, bumping it up to high did help a little bit, but still feels really funky. K-Drive tuning, I don't understand what it does. I thought maybe K-Drive was some kind of a vibration sensory effect, kind of like you see with True Force from Logitech, which has its own separate slider that you can adjust, and it clear as day makes a difference to what you're feeling. But here, whether I was at 100 or 0, I didn't notice a difference. Strength is, of course, going to be the maximum output in Newton meters of torque, all the way up to 7, which is the peak here. And along those lines, I actually didn't have a complaint with the peak strength. Over here in wheel, I want to take this opportunity to remind you that this rotary dial is not bindable in game. It's only for the RMD screen. I do really like the fact that you can adjust wheel rotation all the way up to 2600 degrees. So if you're playing a trucking sim and you're in a big rig delivering a fat load, you can turn the wheel a bunch of times. Granted, this would be a horrible wheel for a trucking sim because it's small and it's a D shape. D1 through 3, unfortunately, can only be bound to functions for the base, like increasing the strength. That is ridiculous. These should be bindable in game. They also don't click in. I don't know if I mentioned that when I was physically covering the button box, but these don't click in, which you would assume that they would. Three-way switches aren't. They're just one-way switches, meaning bottom and middle are null and void, so it doesn't really work like a three-way toggle. The RMD screen over here, you can switch between road, sport, and race. Race is a GT Formula 1 style dashboard, a little bit too cluttered for my liking. Sport, when it was working, was my favorite. It gave me everything I needed, such as my tire wear, and nothing I didn't. Road was pretty laggy, choppy, stuttery, and you do have a little bit of control of your RPM shift lights outside in or inside out. Extended telemetry, you want to leave this ticked and you won't need to hit the launch button, but you want this feature engaged if you are going to make use of the RMD screen. And a quick note there, if you are running SimHub, turn it off or deactivate the RMD device. It is recognized in SimHub, but there are no custom dashboards available, so there's no real point to have SimHub running and recognizing the Turtle Beach dash, so disengage it there because it'll cause a weird flickering on the dashboard. But the only way I was able to get real-time telemetry data on the dash was running the Turtle Beach app in the background and not SimHub. Audio tab is interesting because wheelbases generally don't have this. This is definitely a Turtle Beach feature as there is a 3.5mm headphone jack on the side of the wheelbase. Why would you ever want to use a wired headset when racing simming? Because you're gonna get all tangled up in the wheel. But it makes the most sense when you're doing something like VR or racing simming where you don't want to be caught up in a wire. But if you want to use that 3.5mm jack, you can use the features that you become accustomed to with Turtle Beach, but they don't make any sense here because superhuman hearing is for first-person shooters where it boosts up the mid-range where footsteps would be. Do you want to make your racing game sound weird? Go ahead and turn this on. Lighting. I did like the RGB lighting. I thought it looked fantastic. I just wish that the RMD screen synced up with the rest of the accessories, and that when you're adjusting the color, it happened in real time instead of having to come over here and save it. You don't really have much customization here. You have static, which is constantly on, breathing, which is fading in and out, and then color cycle, which I left it on most of the time, fading through the spectrum. They do get pretty gosh darn bright. Most of the time I ran them at about 50% brightness. As for the pedals, you do have typical dead zone adjustment, and it's very important you put your brake sensitivity on medium or low because if you have it on high, it's too sensitive. It's an on-off switch basically. It's like a button. Low was pretty good. I felt like I had a good resistance. Throttle sensitivity, I did have a nasty issue in several games on several days and several occasions. The throttle would not reach 100%. I would be flat out and then it would show on the RMD that I'm at 3/4 throttle. But then interestingly enough, I just unplug with the USB cable, boop, plug it right back in, and the throttle sensitivities reset itself and it's working good. Little quirks and issues like that are really unacceptable because they all add together to make a very unsatisfactory racing experience. And when you're paying $650, although granted $400 now, that's still a lot of money to be experiencing things like this.
Come on, stupid here.
And it seems like with this product, I was getting a lot of frustration, unfortunately. Back to the software. If your wheel does become uncentered, which I did not have this issue, you can calibrate it here. If you janked up your wheel, you can reset it to default, and you do have some control of the screen brightness and periodic timeout time, but you can control that on the RMD screen as well. And over here in firmware, be very careful. Like I mentioned, it will take all 20 minutes to complete, and there's a possibility you brick your wheelbase. Now, the VelocityOne tuner app is also available on iOS and Android, which is convenient to be able to make those changes from your phone, although not really, because you're already able to connect Xbox, PC, onboard controls with the RMD. You really want to install an app on your phone as well. The application is there, but it's pretty piss poor as far as the customization and control, the functionality, the Windows optimization. That was a tour of the software suite. Now, I gotta be 110 percentile honest with you, as I always am. It does seem as if Turtle Beach has gone for quantity over quality with this bundle, and in that regard, they have certainly succeeded, because just scouring the internet like a kitchen sponge on a pan, doing a little bit of scouring, Giddy Up 409, you're gonna find that there really is no bundles in the $650 price point that has a button box and a display and a direct drive wheelbase. But unfortunately, what's more important than all of that really truly is the fact that each individual core component has some serious setbacks, whether it's software, hardware, or both. So I'm not just going to give you problems with no solutions. I am going to give you a couple of alternatives that you can pick up. Currently on Amazon for $250, the Logitech G923 can be had. That is a wheel and pedals. They work on PS4, 5, and PC. There's also an Xbox variant, and they have True Force. I personally picked up a Moza R9, which is a 9 Newton meter direct drive wheelbase, which is on sale for $400 on Amazon currently. That will also need separate wheels to snap into it, and I cannot recommend more. The KS, amazing, and a comprehensive review shall be done in the near future. If you are looking for a direct drive wheelbase with console support, perhaps that's the reason that you were looking at the Turtle Beach VelocityOne in the first place, you're definitely not shit out of luck. If you want to go a little bit out of the price point of the VelocityOne, the Logitech Pro wheel, I personally cannot recommend enough, but I'll verbalize the pros and cons of it in a future review. But Fanatec has a $400 bundle that's a direct drive and pedals. I think it has pedals. My editor, who's also me, will correct myself, but that's a tremendous value because you're in the Fanatec ecosystem, which is the biggest. Bar none, they have the largest ecosystem of accessories. Drop in the comment section below if there is a sim racing company that has a more robust ecosystem of accessories that I'm forgetting about, because that is definitely a possibility. I'm just one guy with one brain cell total. So it has been a absolute pleasure shooting this video, despite the fact that the hardware, the gear that I was using wasn't the most optimal for the job at hand, and I did stick with it despite the fact that there was a lot of frustration there. I continued to troubleshoot and update ass and seat drive time with the VelocityOne, and I unfortunately can't recommend it due to the several cons, shortcomings, or areas of improvement that I mentioned throughout this video. But having said that, I do again want to say thank you to Turtle Beach for sending this equipment out for a honest, comprehensive test and review. Was that a little wardrobe malfunction there? Any racing simmers out there that want to whip around a track, just let me know in the comment section. I play AC, ACC, Dirt Rally 2, Beam MG. Break my chair. It wasn't latched properly. Beam MG, because the crash physics are insane. Grid Legends, even though it's super arcadey, you saw me playing that a little bit in this video. And in case you're glancing, glaring, salivating, and just curious about the setup that I'm sitting in currently, there is going to be a vlog-style journey of setting this thing up, because I took this room from a guest bedroom, which I sure as shit don't need, to a semi-soundproofed, acoustically treated, race-ready, track-oriented home speedway. The entire purpose of this room is to house the racing sim, so that will be coming in the near future. Make sure you subscribe. The VelocityOne is linked in the description below if you'd like to check it out, and I will see you Stallions and Stallionettes tomorrow. Peace. If you enjoyed the video, liking it helps it to get seen by more gamers, so this information will reach and assist them as well. Much like the back of the TV, I've got plugs for all of my socials down there in the description below. And your wallet will greatly thank you if you check the description, because there are exclusive discounts on a ton of products, including controllers, KontrolFreeks, keyboards, mouse pads, clothes, and energy drinks. And keep in mind that you, the viewer, keep this channel running. The more Stallions and Stallionettes trotting around the stable, the better, so mollywop that subscribe button like it owes you money, and we'll have the same amount of fun tomorrow.